Can hardly see a thing here. Okay. Nine. You look like you're waiting for something, Sri Krishna. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Balabha Giri Bharadhari. Gopi Jana Balabha Giri Bharadhari. Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yasoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Manachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Giri Bharadhari. Jai Gopi Janavalabha Girivardhari Yasoda Nandana Bhajajanarangana Yasoda Nandana Bhajajanarangana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya Asto Tarasata Śrīmad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Grantaraj Śrīmad Bhāgavatam ki Nitai Gaura Premanandi Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Smati Buddhijam Prabhu Chanamane Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Smati Bhaktivedanta Swami Chanamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nivasesha Sanyavadi Paschachate Satarane Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya We're reading from Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, Canto 6. Prescribed Duties for Mankind. Chapter 1, The History of the Life of Ajamil. Text number 9. Sri Rajo Vacha Trishta Shrutabhyam Yat Papam Jananapyat Manohitam Karoti Bhuyo Vivasaha Prayaschittam Atokatam Sirajo Vacha Trishta Shrutabhyam Yat Papam Jananapyat Manohitam Karoti Bhuyo Vivashaha Prayaschittam Atokatam Sri Raja Vacha Trishta Shrutabhyam Yat Papam Jananapyat Manohitam Karoti Bhuyo Vivasaha Prayaschittam Atokatam Sri Raja Vacha Drishtashutabhyam yat papam jananapyat manohitam karoti bhuyo vivashaha prayaschittamato katam. Sirajovacha Drishtashutabhyam yat papam jananapyat manohitam karoti bhuyo vivashaha prayaschittamato katam. Sirajovacha Parikshit Maharaj replied, Drishta, by seeing, Shrutabhyam, also by hearing, from the scriptures or law books, Yat, since, Papam, sinful, criminal action, Janan, knowing, Api, although, Atmanaha, of his self, Ahitam, injurious, Karoti, he acts, Bhuyaha, again and again, Vivashaha, unable to control himself, Prayaschittam, atonement, Ato, therefore, Katam, what is the value of? Maharaj Parikshit said, one may know that sinful activity is injurious for him because he actually sees that a criminal is punished by the government and rebuked by people in general. And because he hears from scriptures and learned scholars that one is thrown into hellish conditions in the next life for committing sinful acts, nevertheless, in spite of such knowledge, one is forced to commit sins again and again, even after performing acts of atonement. Therefore, what is the value of such atonement? Purport. In some religious sects, a sinful man goes to a priest to confess his sinful acts and pay a fine. But then he again commits the same sins and returns to confess them again. This is the practice of a professional sinner. Parikshit Maharaj's observations indicate that even 5,000 years ago, it was the practice of criminals to atone for their crimes, that then commit the same crimes again, as if forced to do so. Therefore, owing to his practical experience, Parikshit Maharaj saw that the process of repeatedly sinning and atoning is pointless. Regardless of how many times he is punished, one who is attached to sense enjoyment will commit sinful acts again and again until he is trained to refrain from enjoying his senses. The word vivasha is used herein, indicating that even one who does not want to commit sinful acts will be forced to do so by habit. Parikshit Maharaj therefore considered the process of atonement to have little value for saving one from sinful acts. In the following verse, he further explains his rejection of this process. Okay, I think we'll move on. It's a storyline, more than anything. Kvachit nivartate badrat, kvachit charati tat punaha, prayaschitta mato partam, Manye kunjara sochavat. Sometimes one who is very alert so as not to commit sinful activities is victimized by sinful life again. I therefore consider this process of repeated sinning and atoning to be useless. It is like the bathing of an elephant. For an elephant cleanses itself by taking a full bath, but then throws dust over its head and body as soon as it returns to the land. Purport. When Parikshit Maharaj inquired how a human being could free himself from sinful activities so as not to be forced to go to hellish planetary systems after death, Sukadeva Goswami answered that the process of counteracting sinful life is atonement. In this way, Sukadeva Goswami tested the intelligence of Maharaj Parikshit, who passed the examination by refusing to accept this process as genuine. Now Parikshit Maharaj is expecting another answer from his spiritual master Sukadeva Goswami. Text 11. Sri Badaraya Aniruddha Kamana Karma Nirharo Nahyat Yamtikas Ishyate Avidvad Adhikaritvat Prayaschitam Vimarshanam. Sukadeva Goswami, the son of Vedavyas, answered, My dear king, since acts meant to neutralize impious actions are also fruitive, they will not release one from the tendency to act fruitively. Persons who subject themselves to the rules and regulations of atonement are not at all intelligent. Indeed, they are in the mode of darkness. Unless one is freed from the mode of ignorance, trying to counteract one action through another is useless, because this will not uproot one's desires. Thus, even though one may superficially seem pious, he will undoubtedly be prone to act impiously. Therefore, real atonement is enlightenment in perfect knowledge, Vedanta, by which one understands the supreme absolute truth. Purport. The Guru, Sukadeva Goswami, has examined Parikshit Maharaj, and it appears that the king has passed one phase of the examination by rejecting the process of atonement because it involves fruitive activities. Now, Sukadeva Goswami is suggesting the platform of speculative knowledge. Progressing from Karma Kanda to Jnana Kanda, he is proposing Prayaschitam Vimarshanam. Real atonement is full knowledge. Vimarshana refers to the cultivation of speculative knowledge. In Bhagavad Gita, karmis who are lacking in knowledge are compared to asses. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, text 15, Na mam duskritino mudha prapadyante naradamaha mayaya paritagyana asuram bhavam astritaha. Those miscreants who are grossly foolish, lowest among mankind, whose knowledge is stolen by illusion, and who partake of the atheistic nature of demons, do not surrender unto me. Thus, karmis who engage in sinful acts and who do not know the true objective of life are called mudhas, asses. Vimarshana, however, is also explained in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, text 15, where Krishna says, Vedais cha saravaya aham eva vidyaha. The purpose of Vedic study is to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If one studies Vedanta, but merely advances somewhat in speculative knowledge and does not understand the Supreme Lord, one remains the same mudha. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 7, text 19, one attains real knowledge when he understands Krishna and surrenders unto him. Bahunam janmanam ante Jnanavan mam prapadyate. To become learned and free from material contamination, therefore, one should try to understand Krishna. For thus one is immediately liberated from all pious and impious activities and their reactions. Ooh. Okay. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshuram Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Hangayate Gurim Yat Kripa Tamaham Bande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam. So, Maharaj Parikshit has passed the test in that he's rejecting the process of atonement because it's not effective. Not effective. So he's offering an alternative, the cultivation of knowledge. But the cultivation of knowledge and let's look at the verse here. He describes how those engaging in the fruitive activities of karma kanda, which were described earlier on, Prabhupada was saying, 80 types of dharma shastra, right? Which is pious activities. Right? It's quite elevated in one sense. It's following the prescriptions of the Vedas, but the Karmakanda section of the Vedas. But here Maharaj Parikshit says that this is avidvat. Avidvat. So vidvan is somebody who has knowledge, but avidvan or avidvat means ignorance, right? So even though this is the following of the Vedic guidelines for purification to reactions for sinful activities, is quite pious, but ineffective. Because the motivations for performing sinful activities are not purified. Right? And so even this more elevated stage of understanding and of practice, as is recommended in the Vedas, is still described here, interestingly, as ignorance. Right? Because it doesn't really, it may free us from the reactions of our sinful activities, but it doesn't stop the sinful activities themselves. So how to do that? So, next stage is come to the point of jnana, or knowledge, knowledge. Freedom from this ignorance that the performance of a material activity effectively will counteract the reactions of another material activity is not effective, not practical. And so it's mentioned here, one needs to develop knowledge. This will bring us to the point of real atonement, where one can be freed from these material desires. Yeah. Prayaschittam vimarshanam. Full knowledge of Vedanta is described here. Now, in the purport, what does Srila Prabhupada say? Real atonement is full knowledge. This is what Sukadeva Goswami is recommending. Progressing from Kama Kanda to Jnana Kanda. He is proposing Prayaschittam Vimarshanam. Real atonement is full knowledge. But Prabhupada says here, Vimarshanam refers to the cultivation of speculative knowledge. In the translation, it's given as full knowledge of Vedanta. But Prabhupada clarifies it more specifically. Speculative knowledge, although it may be based on Vedic principles. And then Prabhupada says, in the Bhagavad Gita, karmis who are lacking in knowledge are compared to asses. Namam dushkritino mudha. Prapadyante naradamaha. Mayaya paritagyana asuram bhavamasritaha. So Prabhupada is describing here the foolish people, the asses, mudha. An ass is often used as an example of a foolish man who works hard day and night to be given some straw by his master, some meagre food. Whereas, the grass, Prabhupada explains, the grass is everywhere, growing on the side of the road. The ass can eat anywhere, but still he has to serve his master and be beaten, carry heavy loads, and is given a small pittance for his work, right? And then when he goes to the she-ass for some enjoyment, she kicks him in the face. Right? And, you know the book Winnie the Pooh? You may not. You may or you may not. Yeah, Winnie the Pooh. So Winnie the Pooh's friend is called Eeyore, right? Eeyore. And I always wonder, why is he called Eeyore, right? Until, again in India, the truth of the animal analogies came close to home, and I saw the donkey getting kicked, and he goes, Eeyore, right? And sort of snorts snorts and carries on, right? So then I realised, now I know why it's called Eeyore, because that's the noise he makes. Right? So, real knowledge means vimarshana means, Prabhupada clarifies, vimarshana means vedaischa savairaham eva vedyaha. The real purpose of the Vedas is to know the end of Vedanta. Vedanta krid veda vid eva chaham. The purpose of studying the Vedanta is to come to the understanding that Krishna is the goal. Krishna is the end of all knowledge, Vedanta. Vedavid, to know me, Krishna says. That's the real purpose of studying the Vedas. And Prabhupada makes a point here. If one studies Vedanta, right, but merely advances somewhat in speculative knowledge and does not understand the Supreme Lord, one remains the same mudha. Right? So one can study the Vedas but not come to the conclusion of the Vedas, and so therefore remain in ignorance and not surrender. And so Prabhupada mentions here, bahunam jammanam ante, after many, many births, jnanavamam prapadyante, after many, many births, one comes to this realization that Krishna is the source of everything. Vasudeva savameti sa mahatma sudurlabha. But such a mahatma is very rare. Right? We see that amongst even, I mentioned this the other day, we see that even amongst the devotees who come to Krishna consciousness and surrender for some time, but then relax and go, because they haven't come to this full realization. It's somewhat speculative or not fully understood. But Prabhupada says here that when one attains real knowledge, when he understands Krishna and surrenders unto him, and of course this is the end, I guess, of the final stage of the 9 processes of devotional service, right? Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smarana, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Atmanivedanam. So, hearing, chanting, remembering, serving. Well, Archanam is deity worship effectively, but serving. And then Padasevanam, rendering service to the lotus feet of the Lord. Vandanam, offering prayers. Atmanivedanam, fully surrendering. These are 9 items of devotional service. So one has to continuously surrender to Krishna. Otherwise, if the devotional service is mixed, if it's mixed with karma, desires for material profit, or if it's mixed with desires for speculative knowledge, then it's not pure. And pure devotional service has to be achieved or arrived at in order to arrive at this stage of full purification, which is being will be described here by... But of course, it's very interesting because the story of Ajamil shows us that even a small amount of devotional service, even if it's not fully pure, is effective. Right? So we should think, should give this up, too hard, doesn't work. When we find that we're not fully purified, and of course this is a stage of anatta nivritti. And of course a stage of understanding the process of bhakti. So our cultivation of knowledge is not so much developing a full understanding of all of the Vedic principles and all of the literature found, all of the Dharma Shastras certainly. But we study the Bhakti Shastra, that which focuses on pure devotional service, or whose ultimate goal is pure devotional service. So our cultivation of knowledge as bhaktas, as devotees, as vidvan, right, those who are learned, is to cultivate an understanding of our relationships with Krishna, sambandha, the relationships between the chit and achit shaktis of the material creation and their relationship with the Lord. Ishvaraha Parama Krishna Satchit Ananda Vigraha Anadir Adi Govinda Savakarana Karanam. Everything comes from Krishna, right? And should be used in Krishna's service. We are servants. Knowledge of our relationship with Krishna means we should understand that we're not this body. And so the question might, if we're not with this body, what are we? And we should know we're servants. And so part of our cultivation of knowledge is to understand this relationship, but then know how to act in that relationship. And so that's what the Bhakti Shastra, if you like, teaches. Bhagavad Gita teaches. Śrīmad Bhāgavatam teaches. You know, there's that story of Satsvarup Maharaj, then Satsvarup Das, who had got a copy of the Narada Bhakti Sutras. Right? He was reading them and he showed them to Prabhupada, and he was showing some appreciation for them. And he asked Prabhupada if he could translate them, and Prabhupada said he would. And he did. A number of verses. Eventually the book was finished off by Satsvarup Das Goswami. But Satsvarup Maharaj explains that Prabhupada had stopped, and then Prabhupada explained that the Bhagavad Gita and the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam teach the same things. And so therefore, and that's what he was concentrating on. So effectively, you know, he would complete the work of translating the Narada Bhakti Sutras by teaching the Bhagavad Gita and teaching the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. And so there's that knowledge of our relationship with Krishna, but then there's the knowledge of abhideya, or practice. Right? Which is, you know, why we study, if you like. To cement our understanding of our relationship with Krishna as a servant. And be purified then of these tendencies for material enjoyment or material accumulation of wealth, of learning, of influence, our power, fame, whatever. And just being a servant, a very humble servant. Is that easy? Being a humble servant? No. It's easy being a puffed up servant. We start thinking, yes, I'm very qualified. I'm a very qualified servant. Then we discovered, no, I'm not. So study is important. And of course, and that's why Prabhupada gave us so much literature. Right? And that the relationship of a servant to the master in devotional service is very nuanced. It's very subtle. It's not subtle. It's purely spiritual, which sometimes can be lost to us in our, haze of ignorance of material existence. And so Prabhupada says here, Bahunam Jammanam Ante, many, many births. Right? It takes a person. Jnanavam Mam, one who's learned surrenders unto me. Jnanavam Mam Prapajyate. Amongst many thousands, amongst men. Sa Mahatma Sadulabha, such a rare person. And we see how rare it is. Even amongst the devotees, we see that many chant Hare Krishna, read the Bhagavad Gita, but then over time they stop. And then they stop serving. Right? Or they struggle. And so at the end of the purport, Prabhupada says here to become learned. Right? Vidvad, or vidvan, as opposed to avidvad. And to cultivate this adhikar, right? It's mentioned here, avidvadi adhikaritvat. Having the adhikar, the ability, right? The ability to surrender, to come to this point of surrender, requires for the devotees an understanding of the process of bhakti. Understanding the process of chanting, because there's our real... Well, studying is purifying, and chanting Hare Krishna without offence. Perfecting the chanting of Hare Krishna, because that's where the purification of heart comes from. And it's a tireless effort. Sometimes we're cleansing the heart, and it just seems like a lump of coal, right? It's just full of material inclinations. We've been in the material world for longer than we can imagine. Well, we can only imagine this lifetime, effectively. It's hard for us to think of a previous lifetime, and even if we do grasp that concept, to really understand that, it's very difficult to face or to appreciate. So, an understanding of our relationship, but then an understanding of the practice of bhakti, what it really means. And that's a proper understanding of how to chant Hare Krishna. Clearing, removing offences, just hearing the sound of the Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. That's a big challenge. Learn how to chant Hare Krishna. We need to study it. Sarvatma snapanam param vijayate Sri Krishna sankirtanam. Nam nam makari bahudha nijashava shaktis. All potencies are contained within the chanting of Hare Krishna. All of Krishna's personal shakti or potency is in the holy name. And as Aniruddha Maharaj mentioned yesterday, he was initiation ceremony, he was saying, you only have to chant one name of Krishna and you can eradicate more reactions to sinful activities than you can perform. That's pretty far out, right? But still, the material motivations come. So we need to chant a lot. We need to keep chanting. We need to learn how to chant for that ultimate purification. And of course, when we achieve that stage, then how do we feel? How do you feel when you've chanted 16 attentive, focused rounds of the Maha Mantra? How do you feel? Huh? Like it's working. How do you feel?
Like you're floating, he said, floating.
Yeah, but how do you feel?
Euphoric.
Euphoric. Yeah, euphoric. I remember when I the first morning program that I experienced, actually it might not have been the first. Well, I think it was. There's a couple of experiences that I had. The first time we went to the temple, and I really was, I don't think I've ever been able to do it successfully ever again, was to hear the Maha Mantra, and then I thought, wow, this is what they mean. It's real. I was really enthused. Because, I'd heard the devotees preaching and I chanted Hare Krishna, but then I got sometimes, and Prabhupada mentions how Lord Chaitanya sometimes he gives away his wares freely, just like a businessman gives a taste of, at the market they'll give you a taste of the cheese that they're selling or whatever, right? Or other things that are unmentionable. So sometimes Krishna enthuses us by giving us a taste. And then we realise, whoa, wow, that's far out. Now I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. So we need to become expert in making ourselves qualified to get that be attentive in our chanting effectively. That's the first. What's It's also an offence to be inattentive while chanting. Is it working? Well, that's a good question. Yeah, it's working. It's working. Perhaps a little not loud. So, although it's also related to the 10th offence, right? To not have faith, not to have complete faith in the chanting of Hare Krishna because of maintaining material attachments. But also, just being influenced too much by ignorance. And not paying attention, being too tired, for example, is a good one. So learning, and this is why the association of the devotees is important, and why we study the Vedas, if you like. What is it? Vedais char saivayaraham eva vedya vidanta krid veda vid eva chaham. Is to know our relationship with Krishna, but then how to act, abhideya. And this is why we study and need to continuously study the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita and, the basic books that Prabhupada's given us, Nectar of Devotion and Chaitanya Charitamrita. These are the 4 pillars of this is our Bhakti Shastra. Yeah, so Prabhupada says here, to become learned and free from material contamination. So becoming learned means purified of these tendencies for karma and jnana. And of course that's the definition from Rupa Goswami. Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana kamajjanavritam anukulena krishnanu shilanam bhakti uchate uttama bhakti. So so Prabhupada says, therefore, so here's our main point here, one should try to understand Krishna, for thus one is immediately liberated from all pious and impious activities and their reactions. Right? So here the cultivation of knowledge, not just an understanding of the Vedas, but an understanding of the purpose of the Vedas. This is important. Otherwise one might think, yes, performance of these type of sacrifices, or performance of these kind of austerities, or drilling the breath, performing asanas and all of that, to learn to control the breath, to control the mind, and then controlling the mind, understand that you're not the body, you're spiritual by nature. This is the beginning. But there's more than that. Going beyond understanding you're not the body, you're not the mind, you're not the intelligence, you're pure spirit soul. And as a pure spirit soul, Krishna das, right, or dasi, understanding one's identity, that's the real purpose of studying the Vedas. Not just coming to the point of understanding that you're spiritual by nature, because then you may be stuck at that level, and not then understand your personal identity, your spiritual identity. Just understand, I'm not the body, I'm spiritual. Well, that's good, but one needs to go beyond that even, to the point of, well, if you're spiritual, then who are you? Spiritual is not enough. So therefore, study of the Bhakti Shastra is required. And so therefore, one understands the process, and of course the beginning of the process is surrendering to the spiritual master, as we discussed the other day. So, one, devotees especially need to be consistent and determined, undeviated. And the way to do that is to cultivate knowledge. And really we do that by studying Prabhupada's books, so that we can distinguish what the Bhagavatam says, reality from illusion. Right in the beginning of the Bhagavatam. The purpose of the Bhagavatam is to distinguish reality from illusion. So therefore, Bhagavad Gita, Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Nectar of Devotion, Chaitanya Charitamrita. Then one will attain a real knowledge and surrender, what surrender really means. Atmanivedanam, something that goes on all of the time. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
I have a question about the chanting. Prabhupada recommended Christian practitioners or Muslim practitioners to still chant the holy names, even if they chant like Jehovah or Allah. And I was wondering if those names are still as potent as Krishna and Rama and Hare, or they can still have the same purifying effect. If you know.
There are, it's described in the Harinam Chintamani, how there are varieties of names of the Lord, and how they're all potent. They're all potent. They all have potency. But the names of the personal names, if you like. So you know, the Lord can be known as the Ishvara, right? Or the Parama Ishvara, the Supreme Controller. So, you know, that's like God in the office, Lord Narayan. And he's worshipped with awe and reverence, right? And usually he's the God that everybody goes to and says, oh, my dear Lord, please, you know, give me this, give me that, give me another thing, right? And so praying to Lord Vishnu in that mood of awe and reverence is beneficial, obviously, and purifying. But the names that have the most potency or the most power for purification are those personal names that describe the Lord in his original form, right? I haven't read the Harinam Chintamani for quite some time, so I've forgotten the logic that's used by Haridas Thakur. Actually, Harinam Chintamani is written by Bhaktivedanta Thakur, but it's a conversation between Haridas and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, right? So, Hare, Krishna and Rama are very intimate and personal in the sense, of course, you know, worshipping Lord Vishnu and Narayan is not impersonal. And we see how Ajamil perfected his life by chanting the name of Narayana, even though that was his son's name, right? Right? He got the benefit. But if you look at the Harinam Chintamani, Bhaktivedanta Thakur describes, Haridas Thakur describes how the names of Krishna describe the original, the Adi Purusham, right? The original personality of God. And also Hare Krishna is Krishna and his internal potency, his internal personal expansion of his internal spiritual energy, the personification of which is Srimati Radharani. So when we're chanting these names of God that are immediately personal and referring to him in his original form, they have the greatest potency, it's described, right? So there's benefits, right? But the benefit that accrues to one who chants these very personal names, and that's why we're given the Maha Mantra, and that's why it's called the Maha Mantra, right? Because it has the biggest, the greatest effect when chanted, without personal motivation, purely with a desire to satisfy Krishna, with a desire to surrender, then that has the greatest potency. Yet, Srila Prabhupada, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that we should encourage people in acts of devotion, right? Don't disturb the minds of the those who don't have a full understanding of the potency of chanting Hare Krishna, and say they're fixed in a particular cultural setting, right? And so chanting Hare Krishna may be too foreign for them, right? We don't disturb them. We encourage them, and gradually they'll come to the point of understanding. So, in that context, we encourage people to chant. Yes, to a more personal realization of what Krishna means. Any name of God is potent. Yeah. And so that's why Prabhupada would do that. Yet, if somebody was open to the idea, Prabhupada would say, chant Hare Krishna. Huh? Even Prabhupada mentions in the Nectar of Devotion how people imitate the devotees by shaving their heads. And even imitate them by chanting Hare Krishna, which is what we do, Still there's benefit. Imitation of a good thing is good. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
May I ask about motive? Because we live in material world, so we cannot stop acting. And when we act, there is always reaction. And reaction can be of material kind and spiritual kind. And what comes if, let's say, when Maharaja Bali refused follow instructions of his spiritual master not to give Lord Vamana 3 steps of land, he broke the rule. He didn't follow the instructions of his spiritual master, but his motive was pure. So does it mean that if we need to consider our motive of action as the main reason how to act? That's my question.
And that's why it's very interesting. The process of bhakti does deal very much with the internal, right? Purity and purity of motivation. And so Bali Maharaj was punished for his disobedience, but rewarded for his motive, right? And so the Lord was pleased, even though his guru was displeased, which underlines the fact that his guru was actually not behaving properly. He wasn't really a guru at that point. And so one can reject a guru if they're not teaching properly. That's right? That's what that teaches us. That simple blind following is a measure of a person's, not necessarily a measure of a person's sincerity, although it could be, but also can be a measure of a person's stupidity, right? if the guru is off, is no longer the guru. Well, can happen, does happen, has happened, as we see in our Shastra. So, but Krishna, Vamanadev, Upendra, understood the sincerity of Bali. And that Bali Maharaj was fully surrendered to him, despite the risks that would come from disobeying his guru. Right? And so, and despite the fact that he knew that everything would be taken away from him, right? He knew everything would be taken. But he didn't mind, because he also understood that it didn't belong to him, it wasn't his. So, yes, Krishna does see the motivation, and the devotees do see the motivation. And Krishna also sometimes overlooks the material motivation of a devotee, because the devotee has sincerely served him and glorified him, right? We see that, interestingly, in the case of Daksha, who got the darshan of Lord Vishnu, yet his motivation for worshipping Lord Vishnu was to become a progenitor. And also, interestingly, Lord Brahma pleased Krishna, yet his motivation was to pursue, to create the material creation. He wanted to do it on Krishna's behalf, but still that was a material activity, as recognised by Krishna himself.
But motivation was to do it as Krishna said?
As Krishna said, that's right, yes. So he said, I appreciate what you want to do. Here's how you need to act to perfect the performance of your material activities by marrying them or by connecting them with Krishna. And so that's what we do, right? And why we study the Shastra is so that we can learn what is the correct motivation, even if my desire is to do things exercising my natural proclivities, which are basically determined by our material setting, right? How do we purify that? We purify that by the process of sadhana, right? The process of bhakti. By understanding our relationships and then understanding the process. So there's sambandha, knowing who we are, and then abhideya. You know who you are, now act. Right? And a lot of what we do is, a lot of our motivation, devotees' motivation is, who am I? A lot of people's motivation, people are very confused in this day and age, right? Even we get confused. Maya, we get it, we say, I'm in Maya. Basically confused, right? Everything is clear as mud. And so we're recommended then to follow the surrendering process, because that re-establishes our identity. Prabhupada explains that, sometimes we'll just be in a state of bewilderment. Just like if you see the fish pond and you get a stick, right? You put the stick in the fish pond and then just stir it around the bottom and everything, and then all the dirt and everything comes up. You can't see anything. It's all just cloudy water. And Prabhupada says then, what you need to do, if you're in that situation, in that setting, chant Hare Krishna. And the chanting of Hare Krishna is like the settling of the water until it becomes clear. And then from the chanting of Hare Krishna, everything becomes clear again. Huh? And then we remember, yeah, I'm Krishna's servant. I serve Krishna by serving my Guru Maharaj, by serving Srila Prabhupada. Ultimately Prabhupada is he's our Founder-Acharya, we call him. And so we follow Prabhupada's instructions. Our Guru says, follow Prabhupada's instructions. And what does Prabhupada say? Become a member of ISKCON, preach. Huh? Then we remember, yeah, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Huh? And then when we do that, then, all of the clarity of purpose, the clarity of identification becomes manifest. And then we're happy, yeah, that's it. How come I forgot that? Huh? How come I forgot it? So, Krishna does reciprocate with the devotee if he follows the process, even if there is some material motivation. Right? That's a given. It's kind of a given. You're in the material world? Well, how did you get here? Because of material desires, obviously, right? Otherwise we wouldn't be here if we had pure spiritual desire, we wouldn't be here, or we'd be at the platform of somebody like Srila Prabhupada. Right? So we're not obviously at that point. So, Bali Maharaj did have material desires. Otherwise, how did he conquer the demigods? Right? But inherently was that devotee. Right? Inherently in Bali Maharaj was a devotee, even though he's a demon. Right? Bali Maharaj is a demon. The grandson of another famous demon. Who? Prahlad Maharaj. Right? I think so, isn't that right? Or is it the other way around? Bali Maharaj is a grandson of Prahlad?
Yes, but his son, his father is really...
Yeah, anyway, demons can be devotees. But they're demons because there must be some material consideration. Of course, Prahlad Maharaj is rather exceptional. So, extraordinarily exceptional. But we don't fit into that category. So there may be some material motivation in the heart of a devotee. Right? And so therefore the sadhana process, the chanting of Hare Krishna, the study of book, study of the Bhakti Shastra, is what purifies that. So even though Lord Brahma did have an inclination, let's say a material inclination, Krishna instructed him, here's how you purify and perfect those activities. And we have, in your setting, you have your duties to perform. Right, so-called material duties. But I have the setting that I was born into and my propensity to act and my duties to perform. And Krishna emphasizes that a lot in the Bhagavad Gita, just do your duty, right? But he also clarifies that by saying, we sacrifice our material tendencies by dovetailing them or engaging them in spiritual activities or spiritual purpose. And that's where that measure of sincerity, that measure of practice, that motivation, as you mentioned, is measured by Krishna and is seen by Krishna. And it was seen by Krishna saw that, or Vamana Dev saw that in Bali Maharaj and rewarded him accordingly. A lesson for us, he took away everything, all of his material. He took away everything. So Krishna will take away everything. Right? When we chant Hare Krishna, we're praying to Krishna to take away everything from me. Don't be surprised if he does. Right? But the interesting thing is he'll then give it all back again when we're able to use it in his service, in that pure environment, purified environment. So, yeah, motivation is everything, but it's purified by chanting Hare Krishna purely, and we chant Hare Krishna purely by study of the Shastra and association with the devotees. That's how we learn to chant. You're a bit late for class, gentlemen. Okay, I think we should finish here. We're getting the rev up. We're getting rounded up by these fellows. What's that? Yeah, the cowherd boys. Just because they're small doesn't mean they're necessarily cowherd boys. They could be gopis. Eh? Or you could be the gopi recognising the cowherd boys. We don't know. Okay, Grantaraj Śrīmad Bhāgavatam ki jai, Śrīla Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Bhaktivedanta ki jai, Hare Krishna. Śrīla Prabhupada ki jai.